All right. Good morning and happy Friday once again. For those of you who are joining us for our Friday masterclasses here at Adobe Live. Welcome, everyone. My name is Terry White, worldwide design and photography evangelist, mostly photography evangelist these days, here at Adobe. And it's my pleasure to be streaming to you once again live from my Atlanta home studio here in somewhat sunny Atlanta today. It's going to probably rain a little bit more, but happy to be here once again. As I've said many times, Friday is my favorite day, not only because it's Friday, but also because it's Masterclass Friday, and it's the one day a week I get to do kind of a deep dive into photography related items. So today is no different. Last week we kind of did part one, which was how to edit, or actually how to take advantage of the Lightroom Classic Develop module. And today we're going to be taking a look at the other side of Lightroom, the other Lightroom product, which is just known as Lightroom. But it's the Lightroom desktop and Lightroom that you mostly know from probably your mobile devices. So we have two versions of Lightroom. Lightroom Classic that's been around since the beginning of time, 15 years plus. And then we have Lightroom, which is the newer version, cloud-based from the standpoint of storing and backing up your images, but it has desktop and mobile clients. So today we're going to switch gears. We're going to spend the entire hour on Lightroom, both on desktop and mobile. We're going to see the differences. We're going to see what you can and can't do. Mostly can, not as much can't. And then we'll go from there. Now, I know that you have your choice of platforms to watch this on. I see people over on YouTube. I see people on Twitter. I see people on, I see people, I may not see people on Facebook yet. Did I start that one? Yeah, I did start that one. Okay, I was going to say, I may not have people on Facebook yet, but people on Facebook, I see you all on all your various places, and it's great that you're watching from wherever you want to watch from. That's awesome. However, if you really want to participate in the chat, like I can't look at all the different chats from all the different platforms and answer everyone's questions, then you want to head over to b.net/Adobe Live. So be.net/Adobe Live. And that's where, that's the one chat that I'm going to be looking at, where I see Mike and Christine and Sam Peterson and is that Basmala and Sean and Nicholas and everyone there that's there right now. Those are the people that I see right now, and those are the chats I'm going to see right now, and those are the questions I'm going to see as the hour goes by. Okay, there's also, and again, b.net/Adobe Live. There's also some announcements this week. So this week, the Lightroom team rolled out new versions of Lightroom Classic, new versions of Lightroom on desktop, new versions of Lightroom mobile apps, and we'll get into a few of those things as well. There weren't a ton of major new things, at least not in Lightroom, but there were some new things in Lightroom Classic that are significant. I'll just mention those right off the bat. So super resolution, we're going to see that today. It's in both versions of Lightroom. Super resolution has made its way into Lightroom. At first, it was just rolled out into Camera Raw. For classic users, you're now able to run natively on Apple Silicon devices. So basically, the Macs that have Apple's native chips, you'll be able to run those, the M1. So it's Classic is now native. Lightroom already was native, so it was first. VRAM optimizations for better production, or hang on, I can't see the rest of that note. For better product stability and longevity. And updates to presets and profiles. And another big one in Classic is that you get the ability for Nikon users to use live view while you're doing your tether capture. It's still a beta. But they've fixed a lot of issues, support a few more cameras, and it's just being able to do live view in Lightroom while you're capturing or while you're doing tethering is great. And so now let's get into what's new. Again, I'm just going to kind of go through them as I'm going through the class, because those were the ones in Classic. We covered Classic last week. The update wasn't out yet. I'm not going to go back into Classic just to show those things, because most of those things I can show in Lightroom as well, that you would be able to see, except for the tethering. And I've shown the tethering before, I think. Yeah, I did show the live view tethering when it first came out in beta. So I did show that already. All right, so let's dive in. I'm going to switch over to my desktop, and let's see, I've got the desktop going here, so I'll show you things in Lightroom On desktop, I've also got my iPad running as well, so you'll see it running on the iPad. And again, I could be doing the same things on the phone. So if I do it on the iPad, I can also do the same thing on the phone. I'm just not going to show both devices. All right, but we're going to start off on desktop. And on the desktop, we're going to, just making sure that desktop looks good. Hang on one second. I think it's the right resolution, but I just want to check. Yes, it is the right resolution. Just looked funny on one of the monitors I was looking at. Okay, on Lightroom on desktop. So I'm in. Let's get to where I am. Let me get to my mouse here. I'm in an album. Now again, for those of you who are coming over from Classic, the terminology is different, but they mean in most cases the same thing. They're just different terms. And someone asked me last week, I'm a Lightroom user. That's where I started. Should I be trying to learn Lightroom Classic? And I told them no, because if you're happy with the version you're on, stick to that version. There's no reason to go to the other version if you're happy. But in this case, I'll talk about it from the standpoint, because I know a lot of people have started with Classic or use Classic, and they might be saying, well, what do you mean by album? So for example, I'm in an album called Editing in Lightroom on Desktop and Mobile. That is the same equivalent as a collection in Classic. So back in the days when they thought about organizing your photos, they thought about collections, and then the team said, well, that today probably doesn't make as much sense because people are used to photo albums. So that's where a lot of the terminology changes come from, is that they change them based on people that are new to the product today, what term would make most sense to that person. And I agree. If I were teaching someone a new product from the ground up, albums is more relatable to than collections, even though they're the same thing. If you had a chance to make a new product from the ground up, you'd probably call it the things that make sense today. Just like we don't call black and white grayscale anymore. It's still grayscale in the product. It still does what it always did. But people are used to the term black and white. They're not used to the term grayscale. So from a photography standpoint, a lot of the terminology in Lightroom, the newer version, is based on what people are used to in terms of photography terms. Okay, or even if you're just as a new photographer, that would make more sense to you. So I've got an album here, and I'm in grid view so that I can see all the photos in that album. I just grabbed all the photos that we hadn't edited yet last week and pulled them over. So a lot of the things we did last week would have been exactly the same in this version, but some of the things are slightly different. And you can look at the grid view one of two ways. So you'll notice that down in the bottom left-hand corner behind me, let me pop over to the other side. Down in the left-hand corner here, you'll notice that there's this grid view, which basically just shows all the photos without any gaps or spaces in between them. That's the best way to put it. Whereas this view shows each photo takes up the same amount of space. So that's great when you want to see things like your star ratings, pick flags, so forth and so on. But when you just want to concentrate on your photos, this one shows you just the photos. And for those of you who are saying, well, I'm used to the keyboard shortcut G for grid. Well, if you press G, it toggles it between the two. So still G for grid to get you there, but the grid can toggle into either one. All right. Purposes. How do I get it to create a file? Different drive. Okay, so there's a question. Lightroom creates a Lightroom CC folder on my hard drive, even when I don't have store local in the preferences. How do I get it to create the file on a different drive? And Matthew, that is one of those things that the team just hasn't got around to letting you set that preference, as far as I can tell. So for now, we're just going to live with where it puts it, and hopefully they'll give you the option to say in your preferences, put that local folder on whatever drive you choose. I think what they're just simply trying to do is simplify it for the people that are used to the application being on the main drive, and of course putting that folder on the main drive with the application, because the difference is if Lightroom Classic has a folder that's on a different drive and that drive's not connected, you'd still see the thumbnails, everything would still kind of work. That folder is probably important to Lightroom, that if it were on a different drive and that drive just wasn't connected or wasn't mounted, Lightroom may not function. So you got to keep in mind a lot of things they do it for a reason. And that's probably the reason in that particular case is that folder needs to be on the same drive that you're running, or it needs to be local at all times, or it needs to be available at all times. So when you're running Lightroom, that it can see it. So hopefully they will get around to making it so you can change the location if it won't kill Lightroom. Okay, now, excuse me. Lightroom doesn't have modules. So Classic has library, develop, map, book, slideshow, web, so forth and so on. There's no modules in Lightroom. It's just you're either looking at your photos or you're editing your photos. There's no, you're organizing or editing. So on the left-hand panel is all the organization stuff, all the various albums we've created over the year that we've been working on this masterclass. On the right-hand side, so for example, if I go to this first photo, select it, and go to editing, notice that the left-hand side goes away because it says, oh, I'm going to concentrate on your editing capabilities. I'm going to concentrate on you just being able to do what you want from an editing standpoint. Now, the other thing that for those of you who are coming over from Photoshop, and you might be thinking, well, I know in Photoshop I can do anything I want. I can create layers. I can have smart objects. I can do all these things, and some things are destructive and some things are non-destructive, but I can do whatever I want. The difference in Lightroom or Lightroom Classic is that anything you do is always non-destructible, undoable, resettable, meaning you're not ever making a permanent change. So by that same standard, you don't have as many editing capabilities. So for example, in Photoshop, if I wanted to duplicate this little iceberg, this little glacier here, this little small glacier, and I wanted to put it on the other side, well, I could make a new layer, duplicate that and put it on the other side and add more pixels to this image. I don't have those capabilities in Lightroom because that would be a permanent change to the photo by adding, changing, deleting, moving pixels. So this is never destroying, hurting, changing your photo in any kind of way that's going to be permanent. This is always just child-safe edits. I like that, Sean. This is always just, it's always going to let you get back to the original photo or let you undo what you did. So with that said, there are a lot of things I do, and I showed some of the things that I always do to every photo, and I would do them the same way here in Lightroom. So the edit panel, think of it as pretty much the develop module. It's not one-to-one, meaning there are some things that aren't here. There are some things that are different. There are some things in different places. But for the most part, in terms of the edits you can do, it's 99% here. There's like a couple of things I can think of that aren't here. But for the most part, it's here. Like one of the things that isn't here is that, for example, if I go to presets and I hover over a preset, well, that's showing me what the preset's going to do to the actual image, which is cool. I love that. I get a nice big preview of what that preset's going to do. But in Lightroom Classic, there's a window in the upper left-hand corner, a little panel in the upper left-hand corner that shows me the preview as I hover over the thing. So just little things like that that are different. Now, I exposed one of the differences in this week's update, and this kind of drove me crazy at first. I had a note that said the presets button moved because it used to be at the bottom. And I was like, okay, oh crap, it's right. It's not there at the bottom anymore. Where is it? I'm looking all around for this thing. It's right here. I just clicked on it. It's this little button up here in the edit panel. And it took me like, I don't know, 2-3 minutes to find it because I'm looking all around for the bigger button that used to be there. And it's just, they moved it, but they also made it smaller. And that made it harder for me to notice it. So there's a presets button that used to be down here at the bottom that's moved up, and this is where you go in and you can use presets that come with Lightroom. You can use presets that you create. You can use presets that you imported from Classic. You can use presets that you bought from a photographer that sells presets. You can also use presets that came as part of you watching Learn content or you watching content guided tutorials that let you export that finished look as a preset. So all your presets show up here, no matter where they came from. And the other thing that's cool about the preset panel is that they sync to your mobile devices. So if you create a custom preset that looks the way you want it to look, then you can save that preset, and that preset will head over to your mobile device as soon as your mobile device syncs to the cloud. Okay, the other thing that's new in this version, and these presets at the top, is that you have presets. These are premium presets, if the Lightroom team calls them. So they're presets for portraits, deep skin, basically dark skin tones. Portraits for medium skin, portraits for light skin, style cinematic, style futuristic, style vintage, and style travel. So let's go into style futuristic. That sounds fun. And as I hover over these, actually I kind of like that one. That almost looks about right for this photo. As I hover over these, it just shows me what those futuristic presets will look like. So in this version, you got this whole new category of presets to choose from. And I'm going to just twirl some of these up so I can get to the ones at the bottom here. The saved presets are the presets that came from Learn tutorials that I watched. So these are all Katrin Eisman's presets. They're in the save category. And then finally, we get down to the user presets. These are mine. These are the ones that I imported, I created, or I bought, whatever it was over the years, and I imported them in. So presets, you can manage your presets from the menu up here. You can import presets from the menu up here, and presets are basically a way to save all your sliders and all the things you did to a photo so that you can apply it to future photos and get the looks you want. Now, presets are different than profiles. So here's the difference. Let me go to presets. Let me go back to presets one more time. Let's go to a preset. Let's go to one of the new ones. Let's do futuristic. All right, I'm going to turn down the light panel. And as you notice, as I hover over each one of these, it's moving the sliders, and probably moving the sliders for color as well. So if I click on this one, because I like it, then it changes all of those sliders. Here, let's close it for a second. It changed all the sliders that it needed to change to make that look the way it looks. So again, a preset is just saving what you did to a photo so you can apply it to another photo. Great. But it's moving sliders. The difference is a profile. Let me undo this. I'm going to just reset it. So I'll put it back to the way it was. And then the difference is a profile may feel like a preset because it is changing the look of the photo as I hover over each one of these. The difference is profiles don't move sliders. They give you the foundation to start with on a photo, and then you can go from there. Now, you don't have to necessarily use it in the very beginning. I always do, but you can use a preset at the end. You can use a profile at the end, use it at the beginning, you can use it in the middle, you can use it whenever you want. But just know whenever you pick a profile, whatever that profile does, it's not moving sliders. So if you've taken the time to go in and do your edits and get your edits looking just right, and then you say, oh, I'd love to see what this looks like as black and white. If you click a black and white profile, it will not move your sliders. It will just show it in black and white. If you click a black and white preset, it will move your sliders and show it to look like that particular black and white. So what do I mostly use profiles for? Since I shoot in RAW most of the time, I use profiles. I use the Adobe RAW profiles as my starting point. So for example, this is a nice landscape, so I would pick landscape. Now, as you can see, it's not a huge difference. It's barely a difference at all. But I kind of like that, like some of these are just subtle changes, like Vivid. It changes the shadows and highlights in this photo. And landscape, bumps up the color a little bit. And then there are different ones for different uses. It kind of just gives me that little foundation of, and this is what they were designed to do. When you snap a photo and you look at it quickly on the back of your camera before it goes away, chances are you're looking at a JPEG preview, even if you shot in RAW. And that JPEG preview has been processed and it looks good and it looks great. And you're like, oh, okay, cool, I got the shot. Then you come home or you come back to your computer and you import those images and the RAW files look flat. They don't look like vibrant. They don't look colorful at all. That's what these profiles were originally designed to do, is put that juice back into the look of the photo that you saw when you snapped it on the back of the camera, if you choose. Because a lot of people like to start out flat, and they like to add the color they want to add, and they like to do what they want to do from a flat, raw file. So it's your choice. You don't ever have to use a profile. You don't ever have to use a preset. Or you can use profiles and presets to kind of get your image started, or even take your image to the final step. All right. So I've applied the landscape preset to this, and again, I could choose it from the menu. And also, for those of you who are shooting on iPhones 12 Pros, the 12 Pro and 12 Pro Max, there is a preset. You don't see it here because this is not an iPhone shot, but it also says Apple ProRAW, and that's the ProRAW preset that, or sorry, profile that we put in to make your iPhone images look the way they're supposed to look, the way you saw them on your phone when you shot them in RAW. Okay, now that I've done that, then you have different categories. So we started with presets, we showed what they were, we went to profiles, we know what profiles do now, and again, you don't have to just use the raw ones, you've got a ton of profiles here. So you can use artistic ones that will make it look a certain way. Again, these look just like presets, and people are often saying, well, what's the difference between a profile and a preset? They will change the look of the photo, but they won't move the sliders. That's the big difference. Okay, then after you get out of presets and profiles, then you move into the other categories. You've got light, which adjusts basically as the name implies, the lighting of the photo, the exposure, the contrast, highlights and shadows, whites and blacks. Then you've got color, which there's a whole new color grading section that we're going to get to. And color is the temperature, the tint, the vibrance, saturation of the photo, and then color grading, which we're going to get to. Then you've got effects like dehaze and adding texture and adding clarity to kind of, bump up the sharpness or take away some of that atmospheric haze in the photo. Then you've got detail for sharpness and noise reduction, which is what it's primarily used for. And then you've got optics for like changing or applying a lens profile. Like, for example, this I shot before I got into mirrorless. So if I apply the lens profile correction, it kind of takes the curvature out of the image and takes if you look around the edges right now, especially down here in the bottom, the edges are kind of dark. That's the vignetting from the lens. If I say apply a lens profile correction, it takes that vignetting out. It kind of compensates for it and applies that. And also takes some of that curvature or bowing out of the lens as well. All right, next up, you've got geometry. And geometry is not going to really help us here, but that's when the image's perspective is off and you need to adjust the perspective of the image. We're going to get into that as well. So I usually start from the top down, and I'll go to light. Actually, I take that back. I start from the very top down. So we did presets, we did profiles, and then there's this button called auto. Auto settings or auto tone, depending on the way you look at it. The way I like to look at auto is, auto says, hey, I know what photos like this normally look like. How about I apply some artificial intelligence, some Adobe Sensei, some machine learning to your photo to see if I can get it adjusted, probably the way you'd probably want to do it anyway. Now, does that mean it's going to be perfect? No, not all the time anyway. Does that mean I'm going to agree with what it does? Absolutely not. There are a lot of times I don't agree with what it does. But what it does for me, and this is why I click the auto button 99 or 100% of the time, is because it moves all the sliders that I would normally move, even if I have to fix one or two of them, because then it did most of the work. Even if I don't agree with it 100%, I agree with most of it. So I hit auto, and yeah, I agree with most of it. Now, this was a sunset. I was standing there, so I kind of know what it was looking like. It's a little darker than I would want, but for the most part, it brought the sky back. It changed the foreground. It changed the color. It changed a lot of the look of the photo to what I would want. And then I still have the sliders here for if I disagree. So maybe I disagree with exposure. I think the exposure could be a little brighter. Maybe something like that. And I could just change that one slider instead of me having to start from scratch on every single photo, on every single slider, every single time. So that's what I like about the auto tone. That's why I'll always risk it. Sometimes I hit it and I undo it because it made the photo look a lot worse. But most of the time, it makes the photo look a lot better. And even if I disagree and need to change a couple things, it's easier for me to change things than it is to start from scratch on every single photo. All right, so now that we got that looking the way I want, the next thing that I would go into before I even get into color and all these other things, I'm going to go to crop, because I noticed that the image looks a little crooked. Looks like it's leaning down to the right a little bit. And I showed this in the in Lightroom Classic. I used the straighten tool. Now this one has an auto that it tries to do, and I'm just going to go ahead and just tilt it because auto is not quite giving me what I want. So I can just tilt the photo and get it straight because I've got a nice grid there to do it. And then once I click off of crop, then it's, oh, that did it a little too much. Hang on, that's going back too far the wrong way. Let's turn it that way. So again, I made a mistake, didn't like it, it wasn't permanent. I can always go back and undo it or change it. So now that I've got the image straightened and I've got auto tone, now I can go in and continue adjusting this the way I want. So the next area I would head to, since I'm kind of satisfied with everything I did in lighting and my changes, I'll head over to color. Now when I go to color, this is where you fix things or change things like your white balance. So your white balance is typically, if you shot in JPEG, you're not going to have all these presets. You're not going to have these choices. But if you shot in RAW, it's going to give you usually the same kinds of presets that you would see on your camera. So for example, if I switch this to cloudy, that's going to make it bluer. So I may not like that. If I switch it to daylight, that's even going to make it bluer yet. If I switch it to shade, that's going to be closer to being right. But I'm actually, in this case, I'm going to leave it as shot because the white balance was pretty much the way I wanted it from inside the camera. But you have the ability to change it. And if you don't like what it did, even if it's on the right one, you can always go in and change the temperature via a slider. So if you want to make it cooler, you make it cooler. You want to make it warmer, you can make it warmer. You can do whatever you want just via the sliders, even if the preset's not quite what you're looking for. Now, temperature and tint adjust the overall look and color of the image, but then you also have vibrance and saturation. So vibrance got bumped up by the auto by plus 15, and saturation got bumped up by plus 1. What's the difference? Why would you use one over the other one? I typically use saturation on images that don't include people, because saturation tends to make people's skin tones overly whatever they are, overly brown, overly orange, overly yellow, overly whatever. So I don't use saturation on people. So if this were a person shot, I'd just set it back to 0. Vibrance, on the other hand, can bump up the vibrance of a photo. That's less vibrant, so I can even go back to black and white. More vibrant, so it just takes the existing colors and makes them more vibrant without negatively affecting skin tones as quickly. And then, of course, you've got saturation, which is I look at this as like, this is vibrance plus 10, is my way to say it. So saturation will take all the color out. Saturation will do more than vibrance. So you typically don't need both. So like I set that one back to 0, and I would just be happy with the vibrance slider. Now, by the way, in case you move a slider and you say, no, I don't like it, you can always undo. But if you double click the handle, the little dot, that always resets it back to 0 anyway, so you get it where you want. Now, I'm not going to go into color grading just, maybe I will. All right, let's go. All right, come back to color grading. I can't remember if I had a specific photo I wanted to show it on. That's all. But anyway, let's go down to effects. And effects is my favorite especially for landscape images or cityscapes, or basically non-portraits, because I get to do things that I typically won't do to a person. Like, for example, if I zoom in on this photo and I can see the snow and I can see the little melting that's going on there, and I look at this and it looks okay, but if I want that to really look sharper, I can sharpen it, but texture is just really going to bump up the sharpness. Look at that. This is no texture. This is all texture. So it's just really going to bump up the look of that. So then you've got clarity. Clarity came out before texture, and you might be saying, well, why do I need both? Like, what's one do and what's the other one do? Think of it this way. Texture is just the texture. That's all it does. Either makes the texture less, and this is great for a smoothing skin if you ever need to smooth skin by reducing the texture. But anyway, texture is going to give me texture. And if I reset that back to 0, clarity is going to give me what texture gives me, but also adjusting the shadows and highlights. So it's going to make the shadows deeper. It's going to make the highlights brighter. It's basically going to give me more contrast. And so if I want more contrast, great, clarity. If I just want the texture, then I'll just use texture. Sometimes I'll do both, but rarely. It's usually one or the other. All right, and then let me zoom out. Dehaze is, this has been around for years, and it's one of my favorite newer features, and that is because I haven't met a landscape or an outside photo yet that couldn't use a little dehaze. So what dehaze does is it just kind of removes that mist or that atmospheric haze that's in the photo. So that's too much, obviously, but it just really takes away any of that that low contrast feel that your photo may have. You can also add it in. So if you're looking to make your image more mystical, more whatever, then just go the other way with dehaze. But I tend to go to the right with dehaze a little bit. Just again, not overdoing it, because once you overdo it, you can really destroy the photo. Not permanently, but you can destroy the look of it. And then I'll just add a little dehaze. Now, I don't tend to use a ton of vignetting, but you've got vignetting that can go for white around the edges or black around the edges. And this is, I typically use this when I really want to draw the focus of the person's eye into the middle of the photo or into a certain area of the photo. So I don't need to do that. I want you to look at all of this landscape, but if I wanted to do that, I could. Now, grain, I rarely ever use. That's adding grain to the photo. That's adding like just texture to it that's visible. And I don't tend to do that, but you could. Detail, this is sharpening. Now, what's the difference between texture and sharpening? Sharpening is certainly applied automatically, by the way, when you bring a raw file in. So that 40, that was there the minute I imported this photo, because it looked at the photo and said, I know that in raw shooting, you lose some of the sharpness just in the capture process, so I'm going to add it back in. Now, what is sharpening going to do? Think of sharpening as it's going to make the photo look a lot sharper, or not. It's really when I want to do subtle amounts of sharpening. In other words, sharpening that the photo is going to look sharper. By the way, this would be 0. This would be if you didn't apply any sharpening. This is 40. You can barely see any difference. And this is kind of taking it over the top where it's even starting to show grain and artifacts. So think of sharpening as a less subtle effect than texture. So if you just want to do a subtle amount of sharpening, if I want to do sharpening on people, I do sharpening versus texture, especially for portraits. All right, optics. We already enabled the lens profile correction. The other one is remove chromatic aberration. And this is kind of one of those things where, does it hurt to turn it on? No, it doesn't hurt. It doesn't help either unless you have that problem. Chromatic aberration is normally you would see it around the edges of your photo. Your edges would look green or purple or pink around the edge. And if you saw that, turning on chromatic aberration would just remove it. And that's just a quick fix. Now, that's provided that you didn't make it that way, meaning it didn't come out of the camera that way. You added so many sliders that it created a fringe around your edges. That's not chromatic aberration. That's over-processing. All right, and then last but not least, geometry, which this photo doesn't need, but we will get to one that does need it. So once I'm done, there's my before, there's my after, and also notice that the before and after doesn't take into account for the crop. So it didn't show me the before it was rotated, it just showed me the before I did anything with the develop module. And again, I can go back and do anything I want to this photo. Any of those sliders are still there. There's still all the changes I can go back and make. Now, the other thing you want to talk about is that, do you have time to talk about the additional adjustments within sharpening? Like if you click the little tiny arrow. Sure, I'll talk about those on a portrait. All right, so let's go into, before we go into that portrait sharpening example, let's go into versions really quickly. So versions at the bottom of the window here. You'll notice that it creates a version for you it creates auto versions for you. So there's an auto version of the original, and we're on the current one. But at any given time, you can create a version. You can call this deep color, for example. And now I've always got those edits to get back to because I created that. So if I go to the original and I want to show someone the original or print the original out or whatever, then I can. If I want to get back to everything I just did, I can go to deep color. If I say, well, I think this one's, you know, a little too juiced, so to speak, I can come in and I can say, you know what, bring the vibrance down, bring the temperature, let's cool it off a little bit more, or I should say warm it up a little bit more. There we go. It's too blue, it's too whatever. Then I can make another version. I can say that this version is going to be called less blue. All right, so now I've got that version. And so if I ever want to get back to the deep color, I've got that one. If I want to get to the less blue, I've got that one. If I want to get to the original, I've got the original. So I can create as many versions as I want of the photo to be able to get in and do what I want, print what I want, export what I want, and always have those versions to get back to without me having to remember every single edit I did. So versions stick with the photo. They will always be there with that particular photo. You can always get into whichever one you like best and show them. So I did a lot of this in Classic with virtual copies. There are no virtual copies in Lightroom, so you have to do it with versions if you want to. So think of versions as, if you're a Classic user, they're like snapshots in the develop module. But since there's no virtual copy, you use versions to show your different edits on your photo, and you can only look at one version at a time. So it can only be on one or the other. All right, let's go in and let me show the portrait example since the person asked about sharpening details there. Okay, I'm going to zoom in on this photo, and this photo is one I just took this week, and I haven't done anything to it yet, but let's go into just the sharpening for it so far. And let's go to detail. And let's twirl this. See, you notice what he's referring to is these have little twirl down. So if I twirl down sharpening, then I get into radius, detail, and masking. So I tend to not do a whole lot with radius, detail, and masking, or not radius and detail. I tend to not change those. They're pretty much good the way they are. Radius is how far out the sharpening will go based on a range of pixels. And detail is, again, detail. It's adding, it's hard for me to explain these. Think of sharpening, this is the overall amount, and detail is the detail within the radius. So if I were to zoom in on this photo, which I can now zoom in on a specific area, I can go into detail, and again, these are very subtle. You're not going to see a ton of difference. I'm not going to see a ton of difference when I change the radius, because sharpening is subtle to begin with. However, if I were to do the masking, which is what I normally come in here for, masking I tend to do on people, especially subjects with soft skin, whether it's females, babies, whatever it is, something that would have soft skin, that's where the masking really shines. So for example, if I crank up the sharpening and I crank up the radius and the detail to really make everything nice and sharp, then what starts to happen, and I can even see it around the edges of her face, you start to over sharpen skin. I don't want the skin sharpened. I want her eyes sharpened, her jewelry, her gloves, her hair, not her skin. Her skin's starting to look bad because of the sharpening I'm applying. Well, what masking does is if you turn up the masking, notice her skin got better, but everything else stayed sharp. But you may not know how much do I turn it up. So if you hold down your Option or your Alt key and you click and drag on masking, it started out at 0, which is 100% white, meaning it's going to sharpen everything. Or if I hold down the Option or Alt key and drag it to the right until the skin is not white, everything that's white right now is getting sharpened. Everything that's black right now is not getting sharpened. So that way I can apply as much sharpening as I want to those areas of the photo that I want to stay sharp, and they will stay sharp, whereas her skin will not be negatively affected by that. So that way I get the best of both worlds, and so when I twirl this down, I'm twirling it down to get into masking. I'm usually very rarely doing anything to radius and detail because I just don't notice enough of a difference in those. Okay, so hopefully that answers the question. Can I automatically apply the adjustments from one photo to a sequence of the rest in the sequence? So let's say that I now did this sharpening. I think I have some other photos of her, at least, yeah, a couple more. I did all that sharpening, and I want to apply that to these other 2 photos, these other 20 photos, these other 50 photos, these other 5,000 photos. So in Classic, you have 3 ways to do that. You've got auto sync, which I showed that last week. You've got copy and paste, which I don't know if I showed it last week. And you've got previous. So let me explain the difference. Auto sync is a button you turn on in Classic that says, if I select 10 photos and I edit one of them, whatever I do to that one, apply to the other 9. That's just auto sync. That's the way it works. Copy paste says, if I apply an edit to one photo and now I want to apply that same edit to other photos, I copy that edit and paste it to the other photos. Just the edits. Previous means I work on a photo, I go to the next photo, I click previous, and it just does everything I did to the previous photo to the next one. Now here's the irony. Lightroom desktop only has copy paste. Lightroom on mobile has copy paste and previous. Lightroom Classic has all 3. So it just depends on which version you're working on. So I applied all of that to that photo. I go to edit, I choose copy. It copies my edit settings. And by the way, I want to show, there is a way to, I'm drawing a blank on it, but there's a way to show. Let me see if I can do it this way. Nope. All right, but there's a window you can bring up to actually check off what you want to copy. Like maybe you don't want to copy everything. Maybe you just want the sharpening. But anyway, I've copied it. I can select the other 2 photos now. Select as many photos, or all 3 actually, and select as many photos as I want, and then just paste, and it will paste the settings in. So it said paste edit settings to 3 photos, it just did it. So now all 3 of those photos got the same amount of sharpening as the first one that I did, or they got the same whatever I did. So for example, if I go to this photo, and I apply some edits to it, let's make it black and white. And let's bump up let's do an auto tone. And let's bump up the exposure. All right, so I apply all those changes to it. And then I copy it. Let's do it from there. And then I select the other ones. Okay, sorry, I keep right-clicking. And I do a paste. And it will just paste those to all of them. So whether it's 2, 10, 1,000, 100, it doesn't matter. It will paste the same edits to all of them. And again, those are all non-destructive. So if I say undo, undo again, 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 I'm going to undo my way all the way back to where I was. Because this is all just happening in Lightroom. It's not ever changing the original photos. All right. Okay, thank you. You answered exactly what I was trying to understand. Got it. Good. Glad I could help. All right, so next up, we did that. I said I was going to do I'm just trying to remember the things I promised to show. So I said I was also going to show the color grading, and that is a photo I can show the color grading on, so let's go back to it. Let's talk about what the color grading is all about. So we did most of the things in the editing. We skipped over color grading because I said I might have a different photo, but I didn't. This is the photo I want to show it on. What's color grading? And what's it for? So color grading is fairly new. It replaced something we used to have called split toning. And what color grading allows me to affect is the color of my midtones, shadows, and highlights differently. And when would I use it? When would I do it? What's it for? It's for when you want to make a photo look a certain way, color-wise. Meaning, and you see color grading in film and movies all the time. So think of, for those of you who are Game of Thrones fans, and they were showing all these winter scenes. Well, where they were filming it may not have been winter at all. It may not have been. It may have been in the woods or the desert. So it may have been in the middle of the summer. But they had to make it look cold or make it look cool, so that you would, and dark, and make it look like it was, cold, and you just felt cold when you watched the scene. That's color grading, and we see it done on film. We see it done on film all day, every day in the movies. But when you want to do it for a photo, there wasn't really great tools to do that for photos inside of our products until we added it and called it out as color grading for both Lightrooms and Camera Raw. So if I go into my midtones, for example, I have a slider here. So if I said, hey, I want this scene to even look colder than it is, then I might drag the blues of the midtones to really look colder. I might add some blues to the shadows, or I'm sorry, the highlights, where the sky is, to kind of just really affect the look of the photo. Maybe I want to make it look like the red planet. Maybe I want to look like the sky's on fire. Whatever I want to do, I'm affecting the look and feel of the photo just by dragging this around. So you can also change the intensity. Maybe I want it less intense. Maybe I want it more intense for each one of those areas. So think of color grading as a way to add feel. That's the best way to put it. Add feel to a photo. I want the photo to feel warm. I want the photo to feel cold. I want the photo to feel old. I want the photo to feel dark. I want the photo to feel like it's happy times. So by color grading the photo, or I want the photo to match other photos taken at different times in different locations. I want them to all look consistent for a storytelling or a video or whatever I'm doing. I want the photo to look like the video. So that's when you start to get into color grading and what color grading might look like. So again, I can go to versions. I can create a new version of this. And I could call it, for example, graded. And create that version. So now I've got a graded version of it. I can always get back to the one that's less. I can get back to the deep one. I can get back to the original. I can get back to the graded one. So you can go back and forth to whichever versions you want to create looks and feels of your photos without having to always go back and remember what you did. The other thing I said I would show off, and this is I said I would have to do it on a different image. This is one where everything looks like it's falling over. Oh no. And again, this is all perspective, shooting down low, up at buildings will tend to always make them look like they're leaning in, even though they're perfectly straight up and down. So one of the ways to fix that is in the geometry area, which we did not go into with any kind of detail. So in the geometry area, I can go in and I can say, I always try auto first, auto upright. Let me see what you'll do if you don't do it right. And I showed an example last week in Amsterdam where I wanted to do it myself manually. So auto upright just simply does that. It fixes the perspective of your photo to make everything look like it's standing up and straight the way it's supposed to. If you want to create your own, which I showed last week, do guided upright, and then you draw out 2 or more guides to what you think should be straight up and down. In this case, auto did it perfectly. I don't need to do anything else. And it will give you that look that you want, that you are creating manually. All right, I just want to make sure I don't forget. I have some don't forgets here. So super resolution, let's not forget that one. And I talked about the presets version. Oh, I got everything else. All right, let's talk about super resolution. Here's a photo of my great aunt. I took this photo years and years and years ago with like a 2 megapixel camera. So if I look at the info for this image is 815 pixels by 774 pixels, only 452K. And it's been cropped, it's been reprocessed, there's been all kinds of things done to it. It's just a small photo. There is no higher resolution version of it. This is all I got. And now she's passed, she's moved on, and she's moved on to the other side. So if I wanted to have this printed at a decent size, I need to bump up the resolution of it. And before, the trade-off was you could always bump up the resolution in Photoshop, but then you're going to trade higher resolution for quality. Your quality is going to be lower. Well, we introduced in Camera Raw back in March, I want to say, something called super resolution. And the first thing people were asking was, when is that going to be in Lightroom? And the answer is this week. So in this week, both Lightroom and Lightroom Classic now have super resolution. So how does super resolution work? We saw that this is 815 by 7, whatever it is, 774. If I want to now double the resolution of this photo, which means double the height and double the width, which basically will make it look like it's 4 times bigger, but it's really double the resolution, then I right click on it and I go into Enhance. And Enhance, let me get out of your way, hang on. There we go. I right click on it, I go to Enhance, and when I go to Enhance, that will default now to a new area called Super Resolution. It even shows you what the pixels are going to look like in the before and after. And the goal of Super Resolution is to double the resolution of your photo and not make it look any worse. In other words, not going to make it look necessarily better, but it's going to look, we're trying to make it look exactly the same or better. So no worse, either the same quality as it was when it was smaller or better quality than it was when it was smaller. So if I hold down, that's what it would do without enhancing. If I let go, that's what it's doing with enhancing. And when I click Enhance, it will take whatever time it takes. And then what it will do is it will make a new photo. So it's going to make a new DNG, a new RAW file, and in Lightroom, it stacks it with the original. So that's why there's a number 2 there. So if I right click on this and I say Ungroup Stack, it will give them to me separately. So there's the original, and here's the new one. So the original was, here, let's deselect. The original was 815 by 774, right? 452K. The new one, which is a DNG now, is 1630 by 1548, and it's 11 megabytes. So it really, really made a difference between the two. Now I'm going to bring it down here, put them side by side, and then we're going to go full screen. So here, we're going full screen on the original. That's the original. And then we're going to go full screen. I'm going to hit the right arrow key right now. You can't see any difference. I switched over to the bigger one, and they look exactly the same. Let me go back. I hit the button. That's the other one. I hit the button. That's this one. And that's the goal, is that they look exactly the same. So if we go in, and that one's not zoomed in quite the same way, and we go in, I can't get them side by side to look the same, look exact same zoom, but there's virtually no difference. And that's the goal of super resolution, is that your photos will look exactly the same as they did or better, but not worse, as resolution very much, higher resolution very much did worse in the past attempts. So there we have it. We have the ability to go in and do super resolution in a photo. Now, I didn't do anything on mobile yet, so let's go ahead and switch over to mobile really quick and just show you, let's switch over to my iPad. And so first of all, I'm in the same album. You can even see the new photos already synced to it. It just put it there. I saw it pop in. I've got the same editing capabilities on all these photos. So if I go into a photo with my Apple Pencil here, I was going to go into this one. I've got the same kind of capabilities. I can go into geometry. I already did auto upright on this one, so this is off. That's the original upright. Auto upright, so I got the same kind of capabilities there. Also, I've got all the same presets. I've got the same profiles. I've got all the same capabilities. And for example, we go into profiles, we can see that this one is Apple Pro Raw because this was shot with my phone. But the thing I haven't talked about yet, and let's do it quickly, is I've got local adjustments. All the adjustments I've done thus far have been global, like they adjusted the entire photo. But if I go into local adjustments, like an adjustment brush, then I can add the brush. And I'm just going to basically brush this grass. And I'm doing a quick and down and dirty job because I got like less than a minute left. But let's go into the grass. All right, and then I go into color. And I can go in and I can actually adjust the color and temperature and tint. It's a little too much. And then go into lighting and kind of make that grass green, and now get all the areas I missed. So your grass can be just as green as your neighbor's, as long as you're using Lightroom. All right, so that's a non-destructive adjustment just by using the sliders in this photo. As soon as I back out of this photo, of course, I would go in and do more. I would adjust the sky, so forth and so on, but we're out of time. As soon as I go out of this photo, oh, sorry, done, then get out of this photo. Those changes will sync back up to the cloud because it's just metadata changes, not syncing the entire resolution of the photo. And then once I'm back on my desktop, that photo will adjust and will be affected apparently, or just as I did on mobile. So I see it still syncing. I see the dots still going. But once it does, this photo on my desktop will update as well. All right, but we don't have time to wait for that because I don't want to get cut off. So thanks everyone for joining me. Up next is the Photoshop Daily Creative Challenge. And cheers, stay tuned, and we'll catch you on the next one. Bye, everybody. Next week, we're off for Juneteenth, but we'll be back the following week. Bye, everybody.